Welcome to Top 5, a show where we count things down from number 5 to number 1, and maybe you'll learn something before we're done this week by popular request, because I keep getting these emails. People are like, hey man, where do I start with comics? Where do I begin with comics? And I know I keep saying this on the show. We need to stop redoing topics again, because just 6 months ago we did Top 5 Comics for Beginners, but this week, Top 5 More Comics for Beginners.
Top 5 comics for more beginners is what it is. That's different.
No, I think it's Top 5 More Comics for Beginners.
Top more 5 comics.
Yes, Top 5 More 5 Comics for 5 beginners. The 5 beginners that are out there listening to our show. Ashley Victoria Robinson is joining us this week.
Hello.
Matthew Peterson is here.
What up, Raj?
And Juan Rodrigo Lopez. How you doing, man?
Hey, man.
So the way we're doing this is hopefully, I mean, I went through my list from the last time since I keep everything, and I made sure that there's no duplicates on my list from the last time. And that's ideally what we should be doing is everyone listen to the last Top 5 Comics for Beginners, and they're like, yes, but now what? So here we come with even more comics for beginners. And Ashley, why don't you start us off this week with your number 5?
Great. I'm going to start with a humongous asterisk the size of Jupiter caveat. This is a hard question if I don't know you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think I and many people on this panel did this professionally in comic book stores for a long time. It is hard to recommend comics to someone where you don't know their taste. If your favorite thing is Lord of the Rings versus if your favorite thing is
Blade Runner,
Fast and Furious. Yeah, those are very different things. And a friendly person at a comic book store can make great recommendations based on that. So please just bear that in mind going into this. I tried to pick things that when I worked at a shop were very easy to recommend to the largest swath of people. And I'm sure because I didn't listen to the one from 6 months ago recently, that I might be tapping that list.
That's all right.
So I apologize in advance if I do that. But my first one is the easiest thing to recommend. It was something that we always stocked on the shelves and is always a big Christmas gift, is Batman Hush. Because Batman Hush is 1, always in print. 2, has Batman in it. Everybody thinks they like Batman. And 3, kind of has everyone that you need to know in Batman do something kind of cool. So if you just know kind of like Batman, Robin, the Joker, that's like all you need. You just kind of need to know that Batman exists and he's a superhero and his name is Bruce Wayne. The Batman Hush is really, really gorgeous. It's really easy to understand. And it's actually a lot of fun. It's so good and so popular. They're making it into an animated movie. It might be an animated movie by the time this drops. Sorry, future people. But Batman Hush is the easiest, I think, Batman gateway drug because you don't need to know anything going into it. Yes, you can get into some of the particulars about which Robin and which Batgirl, but it's all the players that you know. And it's also Harley Quinn's first in-canon comic book appearance. So once you've read it, you can go and tell your friends that fun nugget. And in the opera scene, wherein Harley Quinn makes her first in DCU canon comic book appearance, Jim Lee drew all of the X-Men from his 90s X-Men run sitting in the crowd. So that's a funny Easter egg that you can look out for as well. Like I said, it's been in print as long as it's existed. There's always a new collection coming out, and any comic book shop worth their salt will have this. Batman Hush, I think, is your best gateway drug to the DC universe.
Funny Jim Lee fact, the year that Hush was coming out, 2002, I believe, is when it first came out. I went to San Diego Comic-Con. As I was exiting the Superman Returns Hall H presentation, who should be walking right next to me but one Jim Lee?
Hey.
So there's my brush with greatness. I know, Ashley, it's not that big a deal because you get to see Jim Lee like every other week or something like that. So.
I mean, I've been to his house.
Yeah, I know. So it's not that big a deal for you.
Just one Jim Lee? Are you sure it was the famous Jim Lee?
It was the famous Jim Lee.
All right.
He's easy to spot. He's quite short.
Yes. And really, it wasn't me. It was my wife who was like, look, there's Jim Lee standing right next to you. And she doesn't even read comics. So you know it was the real deal.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Matthew, what do you have for your number 5?
I have actually kind of tried to structure my list this week based on exactly what Ashley was talking about. I don't necessarily know what someone likes, but What I can do is give you an idea of what I would say I like if I know what you like. Because, as someone famous once said, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds. And I believe someone else famous said, actually, una tortuga se comeo a mi mujer. But I'm not sure that that's entirely relevant here. So, my number 5 is if you come to me and say, what's a really good, accessible superhero comic, specifically a superhero book, I think I can successfully point most people to Young Avengers Volume 1. It's written by, what's his name with the face?
Yeah, that guy. I love him.
Heinberg?
No, not that Young Avengers. The McKelvey Gillen Young Avengers from 2005. Yeah, it's Kieran Gillen, who played Amy Pond on Doctor Who, and Jamie McKelvey. And basically, it takes characters from all around the Marvel Universe. It takes some of those original Young Avengers. It takes Ms. America. It takes Loki in his young Loki incarnation. And it puts them together into a story that does not require you to know a ton of Marvel Universe history or information to appreciate. And it has really beautiful art. It has really good character stuff. It has action. It has emotion. It has a whole character beat, or a series of character beats, actually, where all of these characters have to face their parents. And everybody knows that moment where you have to deal with your parents in front of your friends. Or in some cases, if you're old like me, everybody knows being a parent and having your kid have to face their friends in front of you. But it's something that's very easily accessible. It's something that doesn't take years to get into. And McKelvey is one of those artists whose storytelling is really strong and really easy to follow. So, and this is true, some people do need to actually learn the language of reading, sequential panels in a comic book. So if this is your first comic, or even if it's something that you're just trying to get into comics after having read Woody Woodpecker comics as a child, Young Avengers, Volume 1 by Gillen and McKelvey is definitely where I would tell you to start for your superhero fix.
There you go. Rodrigo, what do you have for number 5? Did you also follow the same pattern? I don't know what you like, but I'm going to tell you what I like. So therefore, I'm going to recommend something that is in that vein.
Not really. Although I do like this book, and I don't know what you like, so I guess technically yes. But what I'm going for here is so if you're trying to get into superhero comics specifically, I think that's what a lot of people mean when they say I want to get into comics, and it's very difficult because there's all this continuity. You just don't know where to jump in. And for those of us that have been reading comics a long time, there was kind of just a moment in time when we decided I'm going to get into comics. You just jump into the middle of a storyline, and between context and back issues and eventually the internet, you figure out what is actually happening and what else you have to read, right? And I think that's an important skill for superhero comic readers to have. You have to be able to figure things out from context, and to be able to piece things together even though you don't have all the information. Otherwise, you are just never going to get into comics, because comics seem to often just repel new readers. So my recommendation, my number 5, is Lockjaw and the Pet Avengers. I think there's only one volume of it, but it is a comic about a bunch of cute animals, all of whom are related to other characters in the Marvel Universe. So you pick up Lockjaw and the Pet Avengers, and you will get a pretty complete story about animals with superpowers, kind of going on an adventure. But also, you get a bunch of footnotes. Who does this guy belong to? Who does this guy belong to? Who is this guy used to be him, but then actually became a separate entity? There's some of that going on. So this is like if you jump right into the Infinity Gauntlet, you're just not going to know who anybody else is or what's happening, right? If you jump into Lockjaw and the Pet Avengers, you have a better chance of figuring it all out. Also, if you want to talk about first appearances between screen and comics, I believe this might be the first comic appearance of Ms. Lion. But I could be wrong about that.
You are not wrong. It is
Oh,
correct.
there you go. There you go.
All right, there you go. Thank you for that, Rodrigo. If you are a fan of the Buffy the Vampire Slayer, a show that has been off the air for, 20 plus years now, but you've seen it on all the reruns, you watch it on the streaming medias, and you're just like, man, I love Buffy the Vampire Slayer, then ladies and gentlemen, might I suggest you go check out the current Buffy the Vampire Slayer from Boom Studios. And you might be saying to yourself, yeah, but why do I want to read Buffy in comic book form when it's on TV and a movie and all that stuff? Because this is a reimagining of all of those stories that you loved growing up watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and they put a twist on it. I thought that this was going to be a boring as heck series, and it's actually really good. Now, I think they're rushing a little bit too fast to try to get to, like a season 2 or season 5 season cliffhanger kind of thing. But Buffy the Vampire Slayer at Boom Studios is really well done. It's solidly written. It's been modernized. So, the things that you didn't have 20 years ago, like instant messaging, is kind of an important part, at least for one of the character arcs in the first dozen issues of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And again, if you think you know Buffy, you should check this series out because it really turns some things on its head. And there may be some people that you used to love who now may not be so good. Or maybe they saved that person. Who knows? You're going to have to find out. It's the Buffy the Vampire Slayer series from Boom Studios. That is my number 5. Top 5 more comics for beginners. Ashley, we are now moving up to our number 4. What you got on your list?
My number 4 is sort of in the same vein as the original, but I think it is truly an even superior introduction to the DC universe because you actually don't have to know jack anything about any of the characters. It is 2 stories that they now print together as a single story. And what's great about this particular collection is it's good for readers of almost all ages. You can give it to a tiny little human, give it to a big person, and that is Robin / Batgirl Year One. It's the standalone, reimagined, pared down origins of Dick Grayson, Robin, and Barbara Gordon, Batgirl, who are, for the current intents and purposes of the DC continuity, the OG people to hold these 2 mantles. I think they're also like a master class in pared down storytelling. I think they're so good. I think the art is out of this world. And I think the fact that they're printed as one collection is really, really intelligent because it gives you kind of different aspects of the same coin. But it's not quite as dark as something like Batman Hush. And Batman Hush, I would say, is not even particularly dark when you get into some of the stuff that's happening right now in DC Comics continuity. And I think Robin and Batgirl, for me, hit a real sweet spot in what I think superhero comics are at their best. And I like a lot of dark, sad type storytellings, but they have a levity and they have moments that harken back to the Silver Age and fully embrace everything that comics are. So I think they're a great option, or the collection is a great option when you're looking to give someone not only an introduction to this universe and this character, but to the medium. You can probably find old prints of them separately, but Batgirl / or Robin / Batgirl Year One, because the male name is first, even though that's not alphabetically sound because patriarchy, but it's a great collection.
There you go. Matthew, what is your number 4, please?
Well, my number 4, having heard you say, I really want you to tell me about a good superhero type comic. Now you're saying to me, maybe you're a different you. Maybe it's a different you, and maybe you're like my daughter. You're a little gothy, or you're into weird kind of crazy horror stuff. You like that Black Mirror, or you like that idea of Jordan Peele rebooting their Twilight Zone, and you say, I want you to show me a really good horror comic. That is where, my friends, we come to my number 4, and it's actually something that finally you're able to get completion of this story arc in Saga of the Swamp Thing Book 1, which collects Swamp Thing number 20, which is very important, all the way through number 27. Number 20 has never been a part of Swamp Thing reprints in the past because 21 is the beginning of a big new arc. 20 is actually the beginning of Alan Moore and Rick Veitch's run on the book. or Stephen Bissett, forgive me. Sorry, Stephen. I know you're out there. I know you listen to Major Spoilers, probably. Rick, you too. Whatever. But Saga of the Swamp Thing Book 1 is amazing comic book horror. And it is 35 years old. I will grant you that. But even at 35 years old, it is a horror story that you could only get away with in comics. And it's something that I think if you read through this, not only will you understand comics a little better, I think you'll understand horror a little better, because it's a really, really well done story that takes, first of all, it takes place in the DC universe. So this is a world with Superman and Batman and Green Lantern in it, and they still manage to find and mine these veins of existential terror. They find these dark portions and things that go bumpity bump in the night and are probably behind you right now. Did you look? I hope you looked. Anyway, if you are looking for a really good place to jump into comics, Stephen Bissett is an artist that you want to know about, because he has a very detailed, very lush, very, I don't want to say noodly, but very complex style, but it's never unclear as to what's happening. It's also really dark and really creepy, and at certain points there's a character called the Monkey King. I am 48 years old. I read that comic for the first time when I was 16 years old, and I still get the same horrific goosebumps that I did when I was a teenage nerd in the basement of my grandmother's house. That, my friends, is some really, really good storytelling. And that's why my number 4 is Saga of the Swamp Thing, Book 1, out there on the internet in forms that you can pay for and give people, royalties and like that.
Yeah, let's hope they are getting royalties. Rodrigo, what is your number 4?
My number 4 is kind of similar to Ashley's number 5. Probably the most common thing that I get from people is like, I love Batman. How can I get into Batman comics?
Yeah.
And this...
Throw a dart at a comic shop?
Well, yeah, but it's like, what... I guess this is more of a... what's a good Batman comic to read? And that's why my number 4 is The Long Halloween.
Yes.
Yeah, The Long Halloween is nice because it is a Batman story that does the things that Batman is supposed to be good at, unlike almost every other Batman story. In this story, he's a detective. In this story, there's kind of a... he's like actually hunting down criminals who are a superstitious and cowardly lot, and so on. There are the big crazy set pieces, but they're not the important part, right? A showdown with the Joker is not the important part of this book. The important part is tracking down a serial killer. And The Long Halloween does it all, and it does it all really well. So it's Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale make a great team. Tim Sale's the artist, and makes for a very dark, moody world. It's very cool. Also, if you have been watching Batman movies and you love them, and you go back and read The Long Halloween, you will spot places where especially Christopher Nolan has taken bits and pieces from The Long Halloween and incorporated them into those Dark Knight movies. So yeah, you want to get into Batman, start with The Long Halloween. Dark Victory wasn't bad. This isn't going to get you into like mainstream what's going on right now Batman comics, but it'll at least be a foot in the door. And if you decide that that's not the type of Batman you like, then circle back around and we'll talk about other stuff maybe some other time.
There you go. Matthew, what do you have for number 4? Do you have a way to get into Batman besides shrinking yourself down to a really small size and crawling down his throat when he's sleeping?
I already went.
No, there you go. Oh, you did.
Sometimes,
that's right.
Sometimes people say The Dark Knight.
Yes.
And I just want to...
Don't
do you
ever
go,
say the
do you
Dark
go,
Knight.
The Dark Knight of the Soul?
No, it's always like a 21-year-old man who's like, "Oh yeah, you should read The Dark Knight Returns," and I'm like, that should not be your first Batman comic.
I
Yeah.
think they misunderstood the question as how do I get out of comics?
Yeah.
Or how
Well-
do I really, really want to get out of comics?
How do you get out of comics? Well, you take your finger and you rub the dirt off the place where the cover price is, and then you realize, holy crap, I'm paying $5 for a single issue of comics that's 22 pages. I'm out.
Was there an episode of Brave and the Bold where Aquaman and the Atom get into Batman?
Probably.
There's
There's
no more Aquaman
probably,
sings.
yeah.
Journey to the
It's like-
center of the bat?
Yeah, it's like, yeah.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
like,
the where they go into his
and
brain.
then
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
like riding around on a like a mitochondria or something.
Mm-hmm.
And he can-
Outrageous!
Yeah, and he can control it because why not?
Yep. So many of you may have watched the San Diego Comic-Con 2019 news, especially stuff that came out of Hall H, and you may have seen that they're turning Hawkeye into a Disney Plus streaming service television show. And you may be thinking to yourself, man, I didn't... Jeremy Renner was the most boring part of the entire Avengers. How are they going to make Hawkeye interesting? And I will say, pay close attention to that logo, boys and girls, and then go check out the 2013, who is it? Matt Fraction,
and
David
David
Aja run on Hawkeye, especially Volume 1, My Life as a Weapon, because that'll change your whole perspective on Hawkeye and actually give you a fun, exciting story that you want to read. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to adapt that series into the television show, but we are going to see one Kate Bishop in the Hawkeye television series. So now, ladies and gentlemen, might be the time to jump on Hawkeye, My Life as a Weapon, the volume from 2013. The art is fantastic. The dialogue is witty. The interactions and dealings that Hawkeye has to deal with are perfect. You get to meet Pizza Dog, and you get to find out a little bit more about Hawkeye. So that is my number 4, Hawkeye from Marvel Comics. Ashley, back around to you with our number 3.
Yes, my number 3 is a really great book, kind of in the vein of, hey, you like kind of creepy things? That was discussed earlier. But this is good for women. And this is a book that I would give to nice ladies who would come into the store with their dad / brother / cousin / boyfriend / friend. Didn't really want to
Hopefully
be
not all
there.
the same guy.
I mean, you know,
Or-
you gotta. I'm never mind. Anyway, this is a great book to give to women. It's a great book to give to women who don't think they want to read comics because they will buy this from you. Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. I would say volume 1, but we all know there's never going to be more than the first 6 issues. So the only one that you can find now, they've rebranded it and put that little Netflix girl on the cover. It is not good for tiny humans. It is only good for grown humans. It is a very dark reimagining of Sabrina Spellman's classic origin. All the players are there. Robert Hack's art. If they are not intrigued by the idea of a more adult take on Sabrina, open the book up, show them the pages. It's really beautiful. It's more modern art than classic comic book storytelling, which will bring in or ease in your nice new readers who maybe don't even know that they want to read comic books. I also just think this is a very special book, which is why I'm so sad that it hasn't been handed off to a different creative team or what have you. I think it's one of the best comics of the modern age, and I think it's part of Archie Comics. You know, we talk a lot on the various shows on the Major Spoilers podcast network about the swings that they take. This is one of the best swings that they've taken. It's the one
Mhm.
that I like the best. And I think if people like this, it will open them up to not only a side of Archie, but a side of comics that don't jump to mind. I know we're going to be tossing around a lot of capes and tights in this episode because that's the bread and butter, but this is still very comic booky, very genre-y, but it's not capes and tights. And I think that's why it pops to mind for me. So The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, the only volume that you can buy.
All right. Thank you for that one. That is very good. And again, if you're a fan of the television series, you should really pick up that book. It's not the television series and goes in some very weird directions. Matthew, what do you have for number 3?
My number 3. As you know, we've discussed, I'm kind of moving around and trying to get an idea of not just what's a good comic, because a lot of times when you say what's a good comic, you're going to be limited by the genres that are currently popular. And since about 1954, that's been a guy beating another guy up. Lately, we're getting, some girls beating other guys up, which I think is great. But if you were to say to me, what about your science fiction? I would say, well, I'm a big fan of the Gold Key Black Hole comic books, but they only came out for 6 months in 1980, and one of them will cost you about $100 if you can ever find the thing. But here's a book that you can find, and it's great, and it went on forever and ever and ever, and you should buy it wherever you can find it. My number 3, Akira, which is science fiction manga by Katsuhiro Otomo, I believe. And it is the story of a future world 30 years, almost exactly 30 years in our future at the time it was written. Actually, now a week in our past, according to my social media these last couple of weeks. But essentially, it takes place in the future city of Neo Tokyo after maybe the end of the world, or maybe one of those near world ending things and the rebuilding things. And if you've seen the movie, and if you haven't seen the movie, I recommend it. But if you've seen the movie, you have a feel for about a third of the first volume of Akira. And the character that the book is named for almost doesn't appear in that film. Now, I'm not saying don't watch that film. In fact, I'm saying go watch that film right now, and then you can go out and you can get Volume 1 collected Akira, and you can go through and see the difference between, the comic books that we get in the West, in the United States, and the Japanese kind of language or lexicon of comics. But every single page of it is not just clear and easy to follow storytelling. It is so beautiful and so detailed. Partly because, in other countries, they don't necessarily make a 30-day shipping schedule the primary part of getting a book out. Sometimes they let an artist go and go crazy and draw what they want. And then when you're done with that volume, there's like 5 other volumes. And the ones that I've seen are really huge, thick volumes. You can get them in black and white. I'm pretty sure you can now get them digitally in color.
Yeah, I remember I used to have the entire run, but I had to get rid of it when I moved to California because it was just, it took up an entire long box with those volumes. Yeah. But it was like the first page of every issue was colored, and then everything else was black and white. Maybe they've gone on and done the rest of the pages since then. This is 20 years ago. So, sure. But still very, very, very good. And if you think you know Akira just from the movie, expect to have your mind expanded.
Yeah, it definitely blows up a few of the things. And it is different than the movie, but it is also as good, if not better. And if you know the kind of esteem that old nerds like myself and Steven hold that movie in, and I think you do because you're listening to major spoilers, I think you'll understand exactly what you're getting into. With my number 3, Akira, I think there's 6 collected volumes now, 120 chapters of story. I kind of wish there was more story, but what are you going to do? I think the last reprinted version that I saw came out about 5 years ago, around 2011, 2012. And I think, and don't quote me on this, but I think they were in color.
All right, there you go. Rodrigo, it's flipping over to you, man. What do you have for your number 3?
My number 3 is, I think, a good way, because something that people often ask is, my kids are interested in comics, but they are like very little, or, it's like, kids, it's like you show them the stuff that you're interested in and they don't care. So one thing you can attempt to show them or talk to them about is Bean World.
Yeah.
Tales of the Bean World, or Larry Marder's Bean World. It's been printed in multiple ways. I think they were first printed in the 80s, but Dark Horse has been collecting them. And there's also a big old omnibus floating around somewhere. But yeah, you can get into book 1 of Tales from the Bean World, And it's, the story about these like little tiny critters named beans, and they live in a magical place, but it's like extremely minimalist. Like everything else is like when you think of like a fairy tale world, you picture like fields and castles and stuff. It's like the world that the beans live in is like a tree and some land, and then there's like some water floating underneath it, like by itself. And there's like all of these stories have this kind of like very mythological kind of feeling to it, while also being kind of little stupid stories about these little bean creatures. So it for me, it's always struck this a very good tone between comical and interesting and fun and like primal. So I would definitely recommend for people to get into Bean World.
Yeah, that's a very good series. We've reviewed that over on the Major Spoilers podcast in the past, if anybody wants to go and track that episode down and listen to it. So occasionally people will come up to me and go, "Oh my gosh, Stephen, I love Dungeons and Dragons. Have you heard of this podcast called Critical Role? It is so good. You should really check it out sometime. Critical Role, Critical Role, Critical Role. Maybe you guys should try to play some Dungeons and Dragons sometimes." And I hand them a book called Rat Queens and say, "Here, read this, have fun, I'll talk with you later." Number 3, Rat Queens, which takes the fantasy kind of Dungeons and Dragons tropes, but gives it a little heart, gives it a little feeling, gives you moments that you want to cry in, and then gives you moments where you're just going to laugh and scream out loud because the series can be so fun. Especially Volume 1 is really, really good. Highly recommended. I know it is on many people's must-read lists, and that's why I'm going to put it as my number 3 book that you should go read after you're done listening to or watching Critical Role. So there you go. Ashley, number 2 for you is...
Oh, yes. I'm good at picking up cues. My number 2 is a pretty great recommendation, again, for women, and again, for women who maybe don't want capes and tights. It's something that you can dedicate a good long time to, and also got completely ripped off in a subpar TV show. So if someone comes in and tells you they like this, then you could give them this instead. Fables. Fables, as part of the now defunct Vertigo imprint, in my opinion, maybe one of the best things that came out of Vertigo. What if all of the people that you love from the stories were like edgy and cool and updated and lived in the real world in like a kind of a New Yorky place? The first volume is cute. It's got some really great ideas in it. And then after that, it really, really opens up and I think gets into some of the most interesting things that they have to offer. And I think it really transcends the idea of like, what if Beauty and the Beast and Snow White met in real life? Because like that's only fun for maybe 5 entire seconds. Some of the best characters in it too are the supporting characters. My favorite character is Buffkin. Buffkin is the head flying monkey from The Wizard of Oz. And I think the creative team does a really excellent job in blowing out what is most interesting about these characters, zeroing in on that thing, and then going, what if, if this, then what? Sort of that improv way of thinking. And then suddenly you have this rich and deeply rewarding world that you've been reading for 150 issues. I think it is singular. I think there's nothing else that can touch it. I think Wicked did that in the literary sense, and I think Fable shuts it down on the comic book side. There are a lot of other comics that have done that will do something similar to this, but I think Fables is truly the best of the best, and I think it takes real advantage of the art form depending on the type of story being told, because they do branch out outside of the classic European types of mythologies. We get the 1001 Arabian Nights tales. They play with formatting. They play with how we tell a story on a page. Like, it is such good comics. And again, it's something that you can open up and you can dive into knowing absolutely nothing. It's very accessible. It's printed in a couple different types of collections, whether you want the big, big hardbacks or you want the little bitty trades. I don't know why you would want the little bitty trades, because then you'd have like 165 trades on your shelf, but you do you. I'm not going to tell you how to collect. And it just ended. So Fables is going to be something that's going to be in print for a long time. It's going to be really, really easy to find. And it's a good gateway to people who maybe aren't familiar with comics or maybe think they don't like comics, because they're wrong.
Well, very, very well put, Ashley. Thank you for your number 2.
It's the same thing with musicals. There's something for everyone. You just got to look hard enough.
Yep. You do.
I will point out that Fables has a lot of spin-offs, so you got to be careful when you're looking and you're like, oh, Fables, and then you pick up like, what was that, like Beauty?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the Cinderella was nice. Jack of Fables was great.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, if you're like, oh, Fables number 1, and it's like you might be jumping into a spin-off that is,
True.
4 or 5 volume or 2 or 3 volumes into the story.
I'd also like to point out that Ashley says it is singular. Fables is clearly plural.
Also,
And
be aware that while it is a fantastic story, and after the first arc, it does get very deep and starts turning into conspiracy and why they had to flee the homelands. The first issue actually has a lot of sex and violence in it, so be aware of that. It's definitely not kid friendly. Yeah.
Definitely grown up. For sure.
Yep. But still very good. In fact, it was on my list the last time that we did this topic.
Oh, good.
Which is
What
good.
was on my list the last time?
You didn't write it in the notes, so I don't have it. I just have the ones that I wrote down. So there you go. Rodrigo, what do you have for your number 2?
My number 2, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but another Hellboy movie just came and went.
Oh, man. I think we're going to hit our first double feature here.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, go for it.
My number 2 is Hellboy Volume 1, Seed of Destruction.
Yep.
And potentially, if you're trying to get into Hellboy, there are probably better volumes to get into. But when you like really get into Hellboy, you really have to start at that first volume, because the first volume sets up a lot of questions that the other volumes will then go on and answer, sometimes years later. So although it's like the Chained Coffin and other stories or whatever might give you more of a flavor of what Hellboy is supposed to be like. There's some basically some volumes of Hellboy are basically anthologies, and you can get a lot out of those. It's kind of like Fables. Some volumes of Hellboy are heist. Is like one of them is like a heist, and one of them's like a lot of them are mysteries, but some of them are just like cover to cover fights. So there's a lot to get into Hellboy, but I think you really have to start at that first volume, Seed of Destruction.
Yep.
If you want to get into it.
And that is also my number 2, same volume, and for the same reason, this is where kind of everything that sprouts from Hellboy comes from this. And you can go online. There are a couple of different reading orders that people suggest. There is the actual release order, which is the one that I recommend that you read. Also problematic with Hellboy, like Fables, is you have to be careful, because there are some Hellboy stories, BPRD stories, Abe Sapien stories, whatever, that kind of spin out and split off on certain parts of the story of the narrative of this world of Hellboy. And if you get into the wrong one, you could be going down the wrong path and suddenly going, oh my God, how did any of this happen? Where did it go? Oh, you need to go read this other volume. So there are a couple of reading orders. Like I said, the release order. There's also someone went through and did a meticulous chronological order, meaning that the first appearance of Hellboy in whatever, 1942 or 43 or whatever it is, and then all of the years and all of the stories that put that together. So that's also very interesting if you want to go that way as well.
I would definitely recommend that you do that. If you want to do that on your second read through of Hellboy.
Yes, definitely. Because then you know what's going on. Because you'll actually start way back in like the 1800s with some of the stuff that's going on, and the Lobster Johnson stuff, which is the 1920 stuff that's going on. Do that as a second or third read. Now, I'm curious, Rodrigo, if Hellboy is on your list because I started tweeting at you madly Saturday night when I sat down to watch the Hellboy 2019 film and was like, oh my God, Rodrigo, you're not going to believe this. They are adapting Hellboy in Mexico as the opening story in this Hellboy movie. And not only that, the movie uses Darkness Calls, The Wild Hunt, and The Storm and the Fury, and bits from Seeds of Destruction in this. And it's so cool to see how much care they're putting into crafting that at the beginning of these bits. And then suddenly they don't stick the landing and the entire movie falls apart.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. I have yet to hear really you just gave that movie its most glowing praise that I heard.
I was so excited for this when I saw Hellboy in Mexico.
I didn't go see it because when I looked at those trailers, I'm like, this looks like somebody trying to do Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy again. Like there's a way to do Hellboy that looks different from this, and it just looked very, very similar. So I was like, if you're gonna do Hellboy, you have to do a take. Like either you like there's two ways of doing Hellboy. You do it your own way, or you do that like extremely like obsequious version of like Sin City that who was it, Robert Rodriguez did, where it's like where the movie looks like the comic. Is like, if you can do that with Mike Mignola's art, then go do that. But other than that, you got to give me something that's different, that where you're going like, this is my Hellboy and this is what he's gonna do. It's nice to hear though that they kind of went the mythological route with the story rather than the great old ones route, which again the first
Seeds of Destruction
Hellboy went down.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too because it's like, hey, you guys know the Wild Hunt, right? We're going to set it up. Here's all the symbolism. Here's all the best little bits and iconic images from the comics that we're setting up for you. And now we're going to go do our own thing now. And that plus the rubbery CGI just ruined that movie for me. But it did prompt me to go find, and this is because I want to make my number 2 a little bit different than Rodrigo's. It made me go and find the Hellboy, the library edition that Dark Horse puts out. Now, this is a huge, oversized volume. It's bigger than a normal comic book size, so you can really get your eyeballs in on that art. And beautifully bound. They look great on the shelf. Unfortunately, they don't have everything Hellboy in that library collection form. They don't have BPRD. They don't have what's his name? Not The Witcher, but I forget the other guys. But the Hellboy library collection, the Witchfinder, that's his name. They do have all of that other stuff for Hellboy. And if you're looking for horror, I know Matthew had mentioned some horror. Ashley's got horror on her list. Hellboy horror is really, really cool. And that's why it's my number 2. All right. I think all of us hit some horror. Good job, everybody. We are now up to or down to our number 1s, depending on which way you travel down your list.
To my number 2.
Oh, you're number 2. That's right, because Rodrigo and I were tied. What is your number 2, Matthew?
My number 2. So you says we got the horror. I says, okay, you don't like the horror. What do you like? And you say to me, I like high fantasy and the Lord of the Rings. And I say to you, I will get you a book that I like that fits the high fantasy Lord of the Rings type genre. And you're like, are you sure? I'm going to say, well, no, because I don't really like the elves and the nerds and the D&D stuff. That's not true, actually. I would just say that to be cruel. But if you are looking for a really solid entry-level fantasy type story, you're going to say to me, this is not what that is, but I'm going to tell you that it is. Sandman, The World's End, which I think is either the 6th or 7th Sandman trade paperback. And it is it's the 8th. It's the purest fantasy you're ever going to find in comics. And the reason why is simple. It's a story that starts with a car crash. Somewhere in the middle, there's an elf in a sword fight. There's a big funeral going all along. And Chiron, the centaur who invented medicine, is one of the supporting characters throughout it. It's a story about stories. And when you say something like that, it could very easily disappear up its own bottom. But it doesn't. There is a point in this book where we're being told a story, where the protagonist is telling us a story about being told a story about being told a story that is in fact itself telling a story. It's nested 5 stories deep, and you never lose the thread of any of those stories. And it just veers all over the place. And there's a little bit of it that's almost horror, and a little bit that's almost science fiction, and a little bit of it that's, weird futurist utopian stuff, but it all falls squarely in the realm of fantasy. And it
And a
is
little bit of whatever Prez is.
right. Well, Prez is beautiful. Prez is beautiful, and it's good, and Prez is best enjoyed if you're maybe enjoying a sandwich. But the thing about it is the best volume of Sandman, which is one of those books that people reflexively tell you is great comics without even thinking about why. Excuse me, I'm going through puberty right here on top 5. My number 2, Sandman, The World's End. Go buy it right now. That's what I'm going to tell you. Just go buy it right now, and then come back and tell me how right I am.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Now, did we get everybody's number 2s in this time around?
I think we did.
All right.
Yep.
Now we can hit our number 1s, Ashley. The best of the best, the books that we're going to recommend that you as a beginner need to go and pick up. Ashley, what do you have?
I want to put a big old caveat that I don't actually read this series anymore. I don't think it's the best of the best, but I think it's a really, really good, clean entryway into comics. Saga, Volume 1. Start at the beginning of Saga. Saga does the same thing that most of the things that I have recommended doing. You don't need to know anything going in. There's a really easy elevator pitch, Romeo and Juliet, but it's, a planet and a moon. Fiona Staples' art does a lot of the heavy lifting. It has an adult theme in a way that feels fun and interesting and different than a lot of other comics that are currently being printed that are also doing perhaps a more mature type of storytelling. And it reads really fast.
Yeah, it does.
And for me, this jumped to mind immediately because I've never given someone Saga Volume 1 and not had them come back for the second volume. Now, not everyone sticks with it. I think there is a huge quality dip a couple volumes in, and I don't think it's recovered from that. But if you want to show someone, or if you are interested in what you can do with comics and what comic book stories look like when they are not published by Marvel and DC, I think Saga is a great first thing to pick up. I think there are better things, but I think they're more complicated, or I think they're like I think Black Magic is a better book, but I think Black Magic is something that you need a little bit more familiarity with the medium to ease into. I think Saga is just such a good entry point. And then if you enjoy any part of Saga, like if you thought the humor was good, or you just like the art, or you liked the little seal guy, like if you like anything, the creators are so talented and so prolific that you can go off and you could read the volumes of Archie that they did together, or the one that Mark Waid did after that, or you could read a lot of things that Mark Waid did. But they've turned out a lot of great work since then. Brian K. Vaughan obviously had a huge pantheon of work at his back before he started. So I think this is like the perfect way to be like, oh, I'm going to try this, and if I like it, then you immediately have a very researchable set of rabbit holes that will just swallow your soul and drag you into comic books with the rest of us.
There you go. One of us. Rodrigo, what is your number 1?
My number 1 is a book that you don't even need to read because there are no words in it. It is a book about dinosaurs, but it is in fact not the textless book about dinosaurs that I talked about the last time we talked about this topic. It's a different one. I'm talking about the Age of Reptiles series, and specifically Tribal Warfare. I think Tribal Warfare was the first volume of Age of Reptiles, and to this day, I think it's the highest quality one. I think Ricardo Delgado just like poured his soul into it, and afterwards, I think the other volumes are really good, but I just think there's something about Tribal Warfare that is just magic, and it might have just been that I encountered it when I was a teenager, but also I just, I think it's really high quality comics. It is the story of a clan of big theropods, probably T-Rex types, fighting with a family of smaller theropods, sort of your like Deinonychus or like kind of Jurassic Park type raptors. And the losses and victories they experience going back and forth. They behave like animals, but they're very expressive, very intelligent looking creatures. And there's a ton of dinosaurs to look at and other non-dinosaur creatures as well. Again, there's no words to it. You have to pay close attention to the art. It's kind of easy sometimes to miss what's happening because nobody says, I am sad. You just have to figure out that the dinosaur is sad by looking at it. But luckily, the art is very good. It's very easy to get into. And I think, again, this is just, you can read this single volume and appreciate it. And there's like nothing else, no other like buy-in to get into it. But once you get this volume, you synthesize it, it's really going to help you. Again, if you haven't done a lot of comics, you want to learn how to get into comics and read comics. Another skill that you need is being able to appreciate and absorb the art and figure out what is happening, because sometimes people just read the word balloons and kind of glance at the art. This is all art. You have to figure out what's happening based on the art, and the art is going to guide you through it. And once you have that skill, comics becomes a lot more fun. It becomes a lot more interesting and often a lot more painful, because sometimes you get a comic that's pretty good and you don't like the art in it, and it's terrible because now you appreciate and you're trying to suss meaning out of substandard art, and it hurts, and we feel your pain, and now you're into comics. Good job.
Yeah. And I think one of the interesting things about the dinosaur books, Rodrigo, isn't he accurate? I mean, he's not like mixing different eras together.
Oh, yeah, they are. I mean, to the time when they come out, they are as scientifically accurate as a story will allow. So the dinosaurs are very anatomically accurate. Animals from a particular time period are, if something's set in the late Cretaceous, there are not going to be any like, late Jurassic animals in there. It's all going to be the same guys, right? From particular time periods, from particular locations too, right? So it's like, just because an animal lived in the same time period doesn't mean it was local to that area. Interestingly, some of his books include there's one, The Journey, which is a huge migration, right? So that book gives you the opportunity of seeing dinosaurs from other places, so on and so forth. Obviously we learned that some dinosaurs or some like flying reptiles and seafaring reptiles were migratory as well. So that, there's always room for playing with it. But yeah, they're very accurate. They're done with a lot of love for kind of the science of dinosaurs as well.
Yeah, and the best part is, ladies and gentlemen, you don't have to worry about suddenly in the middle of a panel a dinosaur turning and breaking the fourth wall and going, "It's a living." Matthew, what do you have for your number one?
Why would you worry about that? That's awesome. That was wonderful. My number one, don't be that guy. Anyway, my number one is based on my theory today, where you're going to be asking me about different things that you love, different genres, different mashups, different areas of fiction. And you may say to me, hey, you know what I love? And I say, what? And you say, I love me some sitcoms. And I'm like, oh, you like sitcoms. How would you like to read a comic book that is brilliantly written, brilliantly drawn, and also the best, cruelest, most unusual, and somehow inexplicable sitcom ever written? And you will say to me, yes, please. And I will hand you my number one, Kyle Baker's The Cowboy Wally Show. It's a book that I have spent the last 12 years trying to convince Stephen to let us review on the Major Spoilers podcast, to no avail. And that's fine. I fail.
I'm just going to wait until you're out for a week, and then that's when we're going to review it.
Yeah, well, I was out for a week for this decade like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, we
But
missed our chance.
Yeah, no.
Exactly.
Oh, well.
However, I was out for Black Sad once again. I just like to point that out.
We're just testing you now. We're just figuring it out. When's Cernica going to be time? Black Sad. Put the Black Sad. But Cowboy Wally Show is quite possibly the best answer to Dean Wormer's remark that fat, drunk, and stupid is no way to go through life. Because this is legitimately brilliant. And it came out in 1988 when Stephen and I were in high school. And nobody really paid any attention to it. This is a thick book. This is a modern trade paperback at a time when modern trade paperbacks really didn't exist. And it takes the story of this half huckster, half incredibly entitled fanboy and throws him into the most ridiculous situations. And throughout the whole thing, it's just about how can Cowboy Wally fail to make a quick buck on things that should absolutely be able to make him money. It has one of the funniest things I've ever seen in a comic book, in that they're contractually obligated to make an adaptation of Hamlet, but they're accidentally in jail. So they have to film Hamlet in jail. And in order to do that, first they have to get their cameraman and their boom mic operator arrested. And then they go through the important steps to make this movie in jail. And it's really, truly, deeply, disturbingly funny. And Kyle Baker's, what is the word for Kyle Baker's writing? I'm going to go with genius, with the asterisk that sometimes I say genius and I don't really mean genius. And here I absolutely mean genius. This is an endlessly quotable book if you've ever read it. And I will still occasionally say to Carl that he's mincing churlishly. And he'll tell me he doesn't mince churlishly, and I'll tell him that I've seen him mince, and it's not unlike that of a churl. This is true. That happened once. But nonetheless, my number one, The Cowboy Wally Show, perhaps the funniest sitcomic you will ever get your hands on. I think I'm the only one on the podcast who's actually read it. I may be the only one listening to the podcast who's actually read it. But you guys should give it a chance. It's that good of a book.
All right. So I was scrolling through my iTunes movie list the other day, and I came across the entry for Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and it said that I've watched that movie 14 times since it's been released, and the movie was only released 6 months ago. And I still said to myself, that seems quite low. I think I've watched it more times than that. And then I find out, oh yes, I probably have, because you have to actually watch all the way to the end when the final little Columbia thing comes up for it to trigger the next number. So I've probably watched it more than that. But
That seems like it would really not have accurate numbers.
I know, right? That's really weird. But here's the other thing, too. On our Discord channel, where a lot of this came up, and if you want to get in on our Discord, then by all means, check the show notes, because there's a link to our Discord channel. You can come over there and you can hang out. You can hit in the top 5 channel and talk about stuff. But recently, and I believe it's just the general, or maybe it's the comic books channel, someone was saying, I really want to get into Spider-Man, but I don't know where to start. And a lot of us were just like, you know what? Kind of just jump in and just start reading. Don't try to go back to a specific thing. And that got me thinking
read
about...
like a little person. Read like the tiny babies that we all once were. You'll figure it out. You're smart.
And you all will, except some people don't want to go that route. And so the last time...
Well, you know what? Wikipedia is the thing.
Yeah, well, the last time that I recommended Ultimate Spider-Man, I was really talking about Miles Morales Spider-Man. But I know today, because of things like the Far From Home movie and Into the Spider-Verse and, things people hear about Kraven's Last Hunt and all this stuff, people are going to open up a comic book and go, well, this isn't Kraven's Last Hunt. What's going on? Well, yes, you could go and try to track down the original issues way back in the bins. Good luck. That's going to be very expensive. Or you can get the retelling condensed shorter version from Brian Michael Bendis, the Ultimate Spider-Man run. It's one of those closed series, meaning that the adventures of Peter Parker in that Ultimate Universe has a beginning, middle, and end, and they cover basically all of the highlights of regular Spider-Man, 616 Spider-Man's career, and they introduce it and do things in a very unique way. And if you are someone who enjoys Into the Spider-Verse, Spider-Man Homecoming, the Spider-Man Far From Home, then I think you really will enjoy Ultimate Spider-Man. Now, this is a 25-year-old series now at this point, I think, Matthew.
Ultimate Spider-Man?
Yeah, Ultimate Spider-Man. Doesn't go back to
15.
like...
That cannot be
2000.
true.
Well, yeah.
2001, I want to say, so about 15 years.
Yeah, so about 18 years old, so close to 20, but definitely worth picking up. You can get the big omnibus versions of those books. They're really big, but you'll read through them very quickly because Bendis sometimes will flip back and forth between lots of action with no dialogue, which means you'll flip through it very quickly, and sometimes pages and pages and pages of dialogue. But you can also get through that as well. I find this, again, if you love Far From Home, if you love Spider-Man Homecoming, if you love Into the Spider-Verse, a lot of this will feel very familiar to you because a lot of those themes, characters, and ideas are lifted from the Ultimate Spider-Man run, which again are lifted from the original source material, but they're made more modern and updated. And I think it's really good. And if you're saying, oh man, I really want to get into Spider-Man, here's your chance. And then once you're done with that, then make that transition into regular Spider-Man and just read and get caught up. And you'll figure it out because one good thing that Marvel does is inside every front cover, they give you a previously in, and that will get you caught up very, very quickly. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Top 5 more comics for beginners. Hopefully you found something in that list that may pique your interest. Hopefully you found something in that list that you have access to. And I certainly wouldn't recommend pirating any of these books, but I would certainly recommend going to your local comic book shop and going through the back issue bins in some of these. Many of these are trade paperback collected, and many comic shops live and die on their trade paperback collection, so you can go and find stuff there. Or in trade paperback form, you can go to a local bookshop, or if you have neither a bookshop nor a comic book shop in your area, hello me, you have Comixology, and you can get most of this stuff in digital form. But now it's your turn. What are your top 5 comics that you would recommend for beginners? Use the comment section over at majorspoilers.com. Go visit our Discord and visit the top 5 channel there and share your top 5 there. We're interested in your list. I know new comic book readers are interested in your list. Heck, everyone's interested in your list because everyone loves a list. And we will talk with you soon.
This podcast is copyright 2019 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC.